American Graffiti captured one summer night in a small California town and somehow made it feel like the last night of an entire era. These are the real lives of the people George Lucas trusted to make it immortal. Kurt Henderson was the one who couldn't decide whether to stay or go, and Richard Dreyfuss played that indecision with a nervous energy that felt completely lived in. He was 24 during filming, already certain enough of his own stardom to tell George Lucas directly that he was going to be famous, and that Lucas was just a director. That confidence wasn't entirely wrong. Jaws and The Goodbye Girl followed, and at 30 he became the youngest Best Actor Oscar winner in history. But by the early 1980s, severe cocaine and alcohol addiction had dismantled much of what he had built. A 1982 crash into a tree became the moment he later credited with saving his life, pulling him into rehab, and eventually toward a quieter, more considered return to the screen through Down and Out in Beverly Hills and Mr. Holland's Opus. He has been married 3 times, most recently to Russian-born businesswoman Svetlana Erokin since 2006, and has 3 children from his first marriage. His later years brought serious civic work, including founding the Dreyfuss Civics Initiative to restore civics education in American schools, a cause he pursued with the same intensity he once gave to performance. In May 2024, during a Jaws screening event in Massachusetts, comments he made about transgender youth and the Academy's diversity rules prompted a mass walkout. By 2026, significant health difficulties have led to multiple canceled appearances, including a Jaws reunion in May. When Cindy Williams sued Paramount Pictures for $20 million in 1982 over their demand that she work on her due date, she won the settlement and lost the show. She had played Laurie Henderson in American Graffiti, Kurt's sister and Steve's girlfriend, a performance warm enough and real enough to hand her the role of Shirley Feeney on Laverne and Shirley, which became the #1 show in America. She was 24 during filming, slightly older and more experienced than her co-stars, and Ron Howard has said she effectively taught him how to kiss on camera during their shared scenes. The dispute with Paramount in her final season left a fracture with co-star Penny Marshall that took years to heal, though they reconciled before Marshall's death in 2018. Her marriage to musician Bill Hudson, which ran from 1982 to 2000, brought an unexpected connection. Through Hudson's previous relationship with Goldie Hawn, she became stepmother for a time to a young Kate Hudson and Oliver Hudson. She had 2 children of her own, Emily and Zachary. She was also a gifted writer who did uncredited rewrites on the girls' dialogue in American Graffiti to make it sound like women actually talking rather than a male screenwriter's idea of women talking. She died in January 2023 at 75. At 18, Ron Howard was already famous, which was precisely the problem. He was Steve Bolander in American Graffiti, the class president who mistakes safety for wisdom, but getting him cast required casting director Fred Roos to override George Lucas's firm instinct that Opie from The Andy Griffith Show was the wrong face for a film built on unknowns. Roos showed Lucas a pilot Howard had done for Love American Style that proved he could carry a romantic scene, and the argument held. The role led to Happy Days, and Happy Days eventually led to a directorial career that the industry spent years dismissing. The sitcom actor, routinely written off as someone playing at directing, won Best Director and Best Picture Oscars for A Beautiful Mind in 2001. He married his high school sweetheart Cheryl Alley in 1975, and as of 2026 they have been together for 51 years, raising 4 children including actress Bryce Dallas Howard. His brother Clint has appeared in virtually every film he has ever directed, a private loyalty that runs through his entire career. He attended the Cannes Film Festival in May 2026 and received an honorary degree from the University of Oklahoma the same month. On set in 1972, he was the only principal cast member drinking warm Coke while everyone around him had real alcohol, a small detail that says everything about the filmmaker he was quietly already becoming. The man who played opposite him in the film's racing world had spent the years before cameras rolled doing things considerably more dangerous than drag racing. George Lucas wanted Bob Falfa to look like a 1962 drag racer, which required a flat-top crew cut. Harrison Ford refused to cut his hair, so his character wears a Stetson cowboy hat in every single scene, a workaround that accidentally became part of the character's arrogant swagger. Ford was 30 during filming, the oldest of the main players, carrying the quiet frustration of an actor who had nearly quit the profession entirely. He had been working as a carpenter, building Sergio Mendes's recording studio and offices for George Lucas himself, because he had decided he would not take bad acting jobs just to stay employed. American Graffiti pulled him back. 4 years later, Lucas cast him as Han Solo. He married 3 times, first to Mary Marquardt, with whom he had 2 sons. Then to E.T. screenwriter Melissa Mathison, whose divorce from him was one of the most expensive in Hollywood history, and since 2010 to Callista Flockhart, whom he met at the 2002 Golden Globes. He has 5 children across those relationships. His private pilot's license has brought him close to disaster several times, including a 2015 crash landing on a golf course, a 2017 incident where he flew over a commercial passenger jet, and a 2020 runway crossing that prompted FAA investigation. Now 83, he is starring in the Apple TV Plus series Shrinking and suggested in February 2026 that it may be his final role. The man who played the film's tragic hero had already lived through something real before any of it began. Before American Graffiti, Paul Le Mat had served on a river gunboat in Vietnam and won the Los Angeles Diamond Belt as a professional boxer. John Milner, the drag racing king of the strip in his yellow Deuce Coupe, the guy who peaked in high school and is slowly realizing his era is ending, required someone who carried the look of lived experience without performing it. Le Mat, at 27 the oldest of the lead cast, brought it without visible effort. The role won him a Golden Globe for New Star of the Year, and his follow-up performance in Melvin and Howard in 1980, playing the ordinary milkman who gives a lift to Howard Hughes, is considered by many critics his finest work. What he never quite found was the consistent stardom that depth suggested, partly through choice, partly through a reputation for being selective. He has 3 daughters and has kept his personal life almost entirely private in recent decades. He hated the Deuce Coupe. The fumes from the engine made him sick, the car had no reverse gear so crew members had to push it back after every take, and he found the cockpit genuinely miserable to sit in for hours. His broken nose and physical toughness were real, not makeup. In early 2026, he was hospitalized for several weeks with severe pneumonia, and as of this year he is recovering at home, with all public appearances canceled for the remainder of the year. The girl he spent that film night trying to impress was one of the few cast members young enough to actually be the teenager she was playing. 17 years old and intimidated by nearly everyone around her, Kathleen Quinlan played Peg, the girl who gets picked up by John Milner and spends their shared night gently trying to reach the person behind the performance. She was one of the few actual teenagers in the cast, and Paul Le Mat, more than a decade her senior, was protective of her on set in a way that mirrored exactly what was happening on screen. Her career took its time building to its peak. She received an Oscar nomination for Best Supporting Actress for Apollo 13 in 1995, playing Tom Hanks's wife with a quiet steadiness critics noted as the film's emotional core. Her personal life included an early 1980s relationship with Al Pacino during the Scarface period, and a first marriage that ended in divorce. Her second marriage to actor Bruce Abbott lasted 28 years before ending amicably in December 2022. Through that marriage, she helped raise Dalton Abbott, Bruce's son with Linda Hamilton, best known as Sarah Connor from the Terminator films. She has one biological son, Tyler, born in 1990. Navigating a significant divorce at 68, she did so without public drama or comment. She has continued working consistently, with a major role in the 2024 film Familiar Touch and appearances in Law & Order Toronto: Criminal Intent. Now 71, she remains one of the steadier careers in a cast full of extreme trajectories. The young man who borrowed a car that night to impress her crashed a scooter so convincingly that the director kept rolling. His father was Frank Smith, a Disney and UPA animator, which might explain why Charles Martin Smith eventually found his most lasting authority in family entertainment rather than in front of the camera. He was 18 during filming, playing Terry the Toad Fields with a physical comedy that George Lucas recognized as genuine the moment the Vespa went sideways in the trash can scene. Smith had actually lost control of the scooter. The crash was real, the shock on his face was real, and Lucas kept the camera rolling and used the take. He also missed his own high school graduation to be on set. Typecast for years as the nerdy kid, a label that eventually frustrated him enough to look for authority behind the lens, he directed the premiere episode of Buffy the Vampire Slayer and the family film Air Bud in 1997, which quietly became a franchise. He is a talented pianist who played his own parts when portraying Buddy Holly on screen. His personal life has been kept quiet, with one daughter from an earlier relationship. By 2026, he is cited as one of the wealthiest members of the Graffiti cast outside of Ford and Howard, built largely on directing residuals from family entertainment franchises that most audiences don't associate with his name. The voice connecting every thread of their story that night was already a legend before a single frame was shot. Robert Weston Smith was broadcasting at 250,000 watts from a station just across the Mexican border, a signal powerful enough to reach the entire North American continent and, by his own cheerful claim, strong enough to kill birds in flight. George Lucas wrote American Graffiti specifically while listening to Wolfman Jack on late-night radio, and when they finally met, Lucas was starstruck. He was 34 during filming, playing himself, the mysterious all-night voice who turns out to be a regular man eating a melting popsicle. That image was Wolfman Jack's own idea, offered during the largely improvised scene with Richard Dreyfuss, and it carried the whole film's quiet theme about the gap between the legends we build and the ordinary human beings behind them. Instead of a large upfront salary, he accepted a small percentage of the film's profits, a decision that made him a millionaire and gave him financial security for the rest of his life. He had been married to Lou Lamb since 1961, and they remained together until his death. He died on July 1, 1995, moments after arriving home from a tour, hugging his wife and saying, "It is so good to be home." He was 57. Howard Stern and George Carlin both cited him as a foundational influence, and his voice remains licensed for broadcast in 2026. He was inducted posthumously into the National Rhythm and Blues Hall of Fame. In a film built on the romance of that era, he was the only person who had already become the legend he appeared to be. The line she delivered from the passenger seat of that Studebaker, "Drop Dead," aimed at a hopeful Richard Dreyfuss, was her first moment on a professional film set. Lynne Marie Stewart played Bobby Tucker in American Graffiti and was 25 during filming, already sharpened by the Los Angeles improv scene in a way that made her delivery faster and more instinctive than the script alone could have produced. She never married and had no children. The defining partnership of her life was with Paul Rubens, her colleague from the Groundlings, which grew into a friendship that sustained both of them through decades of professional uncertainty and lasted until his death in 2023. She became Miss Yvonne on Pee-wee's Playhouse, and then found an entirely different generation of admirers as Bonnie Kelly, Charlie's perpetually bewildered mother on It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. Her closest friend in the Graffiti cast was Cindy Williams, and they stayed in contact for the remainder of both their lives, which makes the coincidence of their deaths, Williams in January 2023 and Stewart in February 2025, feel like an ending a screenwriter would have been told was too tidy. She had been filming a new project just 2 months before her diagnosis. She died from a tumor near her liver and gallbladder at 78 and appears posthumously in the 2025 film The Dink, alongside Ben Stiller and Jake Johnson. The man who ran the gang that dragged Kurt into the night had been in actual uniform long before he ever stood in front of a camera. Bo Hopkins joined the United States Army at 16 by lying about his age and served in the 101st Airborne Division before Hollywood had any idea he existed. He was 34 when he played Joe Young, leader of the Pharaohs, the greaser gang that kidnaps Kurt in American Graffiti, already seasoned from Sam Peckinpah's The Wild Bunch and bringing a physical authority to the role that no actual teenager could have matched. He was adopted at 9 months old and only learned the shape of his biological family much later in life, a discovery he said gave him a persistent need to be seen and understood that partly explained the intensity he brought to every character he chose. He played over 100 lawmen and outlaws across 5 decades, becoming one of American cinema's most recognizable character faces without ever quite clearing the threshold into household name. He married Sean Eleanor Green in 1989, and they remained together for 33 years until his death. He had a son, Matthew, and a daughter, Jane. His final major film was Hillbilly Elegy in 2020, directed by Ron Howard, the mild-mannered class president he had once shared a California night with 50 years earlier. He died in 2022 at 84. The youngest actual member of that Pharaohs gang brought a significance to the screen simply by being there. Manuel Padilla Jr. was 17 years old during filming, one of the only cast members genuinely young enough to be the high schooler he was playing. And as Carlos in the Pharaohs, he brought an authenticity to the gang's internal dynamics that the older actors were performing toward rather than inhabiting. He had been famous long before Graffiti. As Jai in the Tarzan television series from 1966 to 1968, he was a recognizable face to an entire generation of American children, and a small but memorable appearance in Scarface in 1983 placed him inside one of the decade's defining films. His presence in the Pharaohs carried a quiet significance at a time when California's Latino communities were almost entirely absent from mainstream cinema, and the diversity of that gang reflected something true about the cruising culture the film was built around. He was survived by 5 children and remembered by those who worked with him as warm, family-focused, and generous with younger performers. He died in 2008 at 52 from colon cancer, a sudden loss for someone who had appeared at a public car show just days before, looking healthy and happy to the fans who recognized him. The woman who received the film's only Oscar nomination spent decades proving she was worth considerably more than the industry was ever. The platinum blonde hair was a wig. George Lucas wanted Candy Clark to look like Sandra Dee for her role as Debbie Dunham in American Graffiti, and she delivered exactly that. A performance warm and funny enough to earn her the film's only Oscar nomination for Best Supporting Actress. She was 25 during filming and received less than $5,000 for the role, with no residuals, meaning she earned almost nothing from one of Universal's most profitable releases. She had met Jeff Bridges that same year on the set of Fat City, and they were a celebrated Hollywood couple for 4 years. She appeared opposite David Bowie in The Man Who Fell to Earth in 1976, a cult film that extended her reputation well beyond the graffiti audience. 2 later marriages, to evangelist-turned-actor Marjoe Gortner and to manager Jeff Wald, both ended quickly, and she has no children. When roles narrowed in the late 1970s because she refused parts that required nothing of her, she drove a limousine in Los Angeles to cover her expenses, an Oscar nominee supporting herself through a side job because she had standards the industry had temporarily stopped meeting. A recurring role in Criminal Minds from 2012 through 2019 sustained her later years. Now 79, she was a featured guest at The Hollywood Show in February 2026 and remains one of the most gracious presences on the convention circuit. She has always known her own value, even during the years the industry chose to look away. The man who told Kurt it was time to leave had spent most of his career speaking to audiences through channels they never saw. The scene where Mr. Wolf admits to Kurt that he once planned to leave and never did was largely improvised. Terrence McGovern played the high school teacher whose unguarded moment in American Graffiti accidentally becomes the push Kurt needed, and George Lucas gave him room to find it rather than simply execute a written line. He was 30 during filming, already a recognizable voice at San Francisco's KSAN radio, and that background in holding audiences he could not see gave his performance a confidence well beyond his screen time. What he built afterward was largely invisible to casual viewers. He voiced Launchpad McQuack in DuckTales from 1987 to 1990 and delivered uncredited voice work for Star Wars: A New Hope in 1977, including the Death Star announcement heard by hundreds of millions of people who had no idea who was speaking. He lost his son Anthony in 2003, a grief he has connected openly to his sobriety advocacy in the years since, having been sober for decades and using that experience to support others in the industry. He founded the Marin Actors Workshop and has taught voice acting to students across Northern California, building something genuinely lasting entirely outside the spotlight. Now 84 and married to Molly Blaisdell since 2012, he appeared at The Hollywood Show in February 2026 alongside Candy Clark and continues attending animation conventions where DuckTales fans find him as warm as they had hoped. The voice that told a restless teenager it was time to leave turned out to be one of the most quietly consequential in the whole film. Looking at this cast, would you have gotten on Kurt's plane? Subscribe to Classic Hollywood Echoes.